Okay, y'all, welcome to Unit 4. And in Unit 4, we're going to be talking about the lead up to the Civil War and the war itself. Today, however, we're going to be talking about the Antebellum North and the Antebellum South. And we're going to see how different these two regions really are from each other. We're going to see how their economies were different, how their populations were different, and how those populations and economies changed their ways of thinking in these two different regions. And in comparing and contrasting both the North and the South from each other, then it'll make the sectional crisis that leads up to the Civil War make a little bit more sense. So we'll start off with the North and how industry specifically was shaping the North. The Industrial Revolution was a revolution in production and manufacturing which began in Europe in the 1700s with the improvement and development of power-driven machines. As the Industrial Revolution gained momentum, more and more of the world's goods were produced in factories instead of in people's homes. The energy for the first factories was provided by water specifically, through the use of the water wheel. Although water had been used in America to drive some types of machinery, like mill wheels and lumber saws, its real economic potential was not exploited in America until the arrival of Samuel Slater. Slater was a skilled English mechanic who had come to America at the age of 21. In England, he had worked in a cotton mill. Because of this, he knew a great deal about the textile industry. The British government had tried to keep the mechanics of their textile industry a secret. They had forbidden the sale of textile machinery overseas and had kept skilled textile workers from leaving England. But Slater somehow was able to get out and come to America. Shortly after arriving in the U.S., he met a capitalist named Moses Brown. Brown funded Slater. Slater reproduced the textile machines that he had worked on in England from his own memory. Slater became the father of the American factory system. By the 1830s, the U.S. had already felt the influence of the changes that were brought about by the Industrial Revolution. America had seen the growth of communication, transportation, and manufacturing, and America was developing into a great modern nation. The census of 1850 revealed remarkable growth in the population. It also revealed change in its sectional distribution. In 1790, the population of the U.S. was about 3,900,000. In 1830, there were 12,800,000. In 1850, the population had grown to over 23 million. In 1790, nearly 90% of all Americans lived east of the Alleghenies. By 1850, this percentage had decreased to 55%. Immigration growth in the U.S. by 1850 was primarily due to the rapid reproduction of native stock. Between 1820 and 1830, less than 500,000 foreigners came to America. Over the next 20 years, 5 times that many came to the U.S., and most of them were for Great Britain, Ireland, and the German states. By 1850, nearly 12% of the population was foreign-born. The U.S. had become a haven for those who fled poor working conditions in Britain, from famine in Ireland, and from political unrest in Europe. At the close of the Revolution, only 5 cities in the U.S. had more than 8,000 inhabitants. By 1850, there were 141 cities with near that population. These urban centers were already struggling with all the problems of urbanization, such as sanitation, public health, fires, and urban crime. The native-born Americans blamed these problems on foreign immigrants. In 1850, the nativists formed the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner and Anti-Immigration Society. Within a few years, this organization developed into the powerful American or Know-Nothing Party. From the day in 1790 that Slater completed the first cotton mill in the U.S., the growth of industry was rapid. By 1850, the annual output of U.S. mills and factories had reached over $51 billion. By 1850, for the first time in our history, industry had surpassed agriculture as the most important economic sector. Improvements in technology gradually made greater industrialization possible. So let's look at some of these improvements. In 1814, Francis Lowell and Paul Moody perfected the power loom. In 1833, Frederick Geisenhainer smelted iron ore using a new anthracite coal process. In 1846, Elias Howe invented the sewing machine. In 1803, Oliver Evans converted the low-pressure steam engine invented by James Watt into a more effective high-pressure engine. By the 1850s, New England factories had begun to use steam power as their main source of power. The invention of the electrical telegraph was of great significance. Samuel F. B. Morse succeeded in making the telegraph a practical means of communication in 1837. The first significant telegraph line was completed in 1843, and by 1860 more than 500,000 miles of telegraph lines were in use in the U.S. Eli Whitney also hit upon the idea of building machines with interchangeable parts. In 1798, Whitney wrote the Secretary of the Treasury requesting a contract to make rifles for the military. He used machines to make the parts. 2 years later, in front of several skeptical officials, Whitney unpacked a box containing the parts for 10 rifles. At Whitney's request, each official selected one part from each pile of identical parts, and Whitney assembled the rifle. The process was repeated until 10 guns were assembled. The first 3 decades of the 19th century saw the introduction of new and better methods of farming. Among the most important were the introduction of better fertilizers, crop rotation methods, and scientific stock breeding. New machines were also introduced, which led to improvements in agriculture. As we shall see, one of these, the cotton gin, also brought about social and political change as well. So several inventions that are worthy of note are: Cyrus McCormick invented a mechanical reaper in 1834, John Deere introduced the steel plow in 1839, and Eli Whitney introduced the cotton gin in 1793. From the point of view of the historian, this simple machine may be among the most revolutionary inventions since the invention of the wheel or the stirrup. It was the cotton gin that made the production of cotton across most of the South possible. Since it became possible to remove the seeds from raw cotton very rapidly by using Whitney's gin, larger areas could be planted. Larger plantations needed more slaves to grow and pick cotton. The demand for slaves grew enormously in the 1820s and 1830s. At about the same time, the British government had outlawed the slave trade with Africa. The price of slaves in the South increased, and the increase in the slave population in the South made slavery an important political as well as social issue. So let's talk about the antebellum South and see how different it was from the North. The southern states in the 1840s covered a large area. The Cotton South stretched from southern Maryland to Florida, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and it also included Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. Since the southern economy depended upon agriculture, industries and towns were slower to grow than in the North. There were a few large important cities in the South, and the most important were the seaports of Charleston, South Carolina, and New Orleans. These and a few other cities were the homes of industries and trade, but the most important single economic element of the South in the 1840s was the production of cotton. So at the turn of the 19th century, the South had produced a large variety of agricultural goods. Among the most important were indigo, rice, tobacco, sugarcane, and a little bit of cotton. But then, cotton became the exclusive staple crop in the entire South except for in Louisiana, where it was sugarcane. In the late 1700s, as we had talked about before with the North, British inventors developed power-driven machinery for spinning thread and weaving cloth. And before long, these textile mills were in operation in both Britain and in the New England and Middle Atlantic states. The rise in production of cloth created a rise in demand for cotton fiber. But there was only one problem. The boll of the cotton plant, where the fiber actually comes from, is a tangle of fiber and seeds. And there are 2 types of cotton that grow in the United States. There's sea island or lowland cotton, which grows along the plain along the Atlantic coast of the Carolinas and Virginia. Upland cotton will grow just about anywhere in the South where the humidity is not too high, and it is fairly easy to separate the seeds from the fiber or of the sea island cotton. The shorter fibers of upland cotton, however, are very difficult to separate by hand. The seeds cling to upland cotton so tightly that a skilled worker could only recover about 1 pound of cotton a day. And because of this, it was only profitable to grow cotton in those areas of the South where sea island cotton would grow. In 1793, Eli Whitney was visiting a friend on a cotton plantation, and Whitney's friend was explaining the production of cotton fiber to him. He mentioned that more cotton could be produced if there were only a way to separate the seeds more efficiently. That evening, Whitney designed the first cotton gin. The cotton gin is a mechanical device that separates the seeds from the cotton fiber quickly, and efficiently. The gin doesn't care what kind of cotton it is. It can do just as good of a job on the upland cotton as it can on sea island cotton. Whitney's machine operated on steam power, which could separate more than 1,000 pounds of cotton a day, compared to the 1 pound of cotton that a worker could do before. As it became easier to separate the seeds from the cotton bolls, cotton became much more profitable, and more southern farmers began to grow cotton as their cash crop. Bales of cotton were shipped from southern ports to Britain and New England in greater and greater quantity. American production of cotton grew from 4,000 bales in 1790 to 732,000 bales in 1830. By 1860, the South produced over 4 million bales of cotton a year. From 1800 to 1860, the Southern economy became increasingly dependent upon cotton. Textile mill owners paid higher and higher prices for this cotton. So growing cotton is a very labor-intensive process. A great deal of labor is needed to plant and to harvest it. Now, the South didn't have a large workforce like the northern states with their large populations. So slavery offered a large, inexpensive workforce in the production of cotton. As more and more farmers switched over to cotton production, the Southern economy became more and more dependent upon slavery. At about the same time that the demand for slaves rose in the South, the British interrupted the African slave trade by blockading West African ports. This blockade made it more difficult for the slave ships to get from Africa to the slave ports in Cuba and in Haiti. Slave importation in the South dropped to a trickle, and the price of an able field slave went from about $5,300 in 1820 to as high as $53,000 by 1855. And by 1860, there were about 4 million slaves in the South out of the total population of about 12 million. So next time, we'll talk about how the divisions over slavery between the North and the South led to this sectional crisis that started the Civil War.